The sun had just begun to fall behind the jagged hills when Taza stepped into the field that once smelled of wheat and wind. Now it smelled of dust, rust, and memory. 6 months had passed since he last set foot on this land, 6 long, empty months since he'd ridden away from the woman who had once worn his heart on her finger. He didn't mean to come back. His horse had thrown a shoe, and he'd stopped at the edge of this abandoned farmland to rest. But fate has a cruel way of circling back like a hawk that never forgets the shape of its prey. The land looked deserted now. The barn leaned to one side, the fences split like broken ribs. Wind whispered through the tall weeds, carrying the faint rattle of something metallic beneath the soil. When Taza bent down to see what it was, his calloused fingers brushed against the cold edge of a small silver ring, tarnished. Half buried in dirt dot for a long moment, he couldn't breathe. He knew that ring, the turquoise stone, dull now but once bright as desert sky, was one he had carved himself, a token of promise. He had given it to Evelyn Hawley, a rancher's widow from the edge of Silver Creek, when the world between them had still felt possible. He had watched her eyes glisten when she'd taken it from his hand, her fingers trembling as though she could already feel the weight of what it meant, a bond between an Apache and a white woman, both outcasts in their own ways, and now it lay here. In the dirt, forgotten. Taza stood slowly, the ring clutched in his palm. His chest felt tight, as if the desert itself had wrapped its dry hands around his ribs. He looked around at the house that stood empty, the silent barn, the scorched patches of earth. She was gone. The entire place looked as though it had been abandoned. For months, he swallowed hard and slipped the ring into a leather pouch around his neck. He had no intention of wearing it, not yet. Not until he knew why she had left it behind. Evelyn Hawley had been a strong woman, too proud to weep, too stubborn to bend. Her husband had died 3 winters ago, leaving her with debt and a crumbling ranch. When Taza had first met her, she'd been standing over a dying horse, shotgun in hand, tears hidden behind grit and determination. He'd helped her bury the animal that day, and in the days that followed, she'd let him stay, not out of kindness, but because she couldn't do the work alone, and somewhere between the hay bales and quiet nights by the fire, they'd found something rare. Something neither of them had planned, but it hadn't lasted. The last time Taza had seen her, she'd stood at this very fence line with tears she refused to let fall. "They won't stop," she'd said. "The town sees me as cursed already. If they find out I've been with you," he hadn't asked her to choose. He'd only nodded, knowing her fear came from a place he couldn't blame. Then he'd ridden into the mountains, leaving her to her silence and shame. Now, as the moon began to rise, he realized how foolish that choice had been. He moved toward the farmhouse. The door creaked open under his hand. Inside, the air smelled of dust and wood rot. A broken chair lay on its side. Dishes still sat on the table, half covered in cobwebs. As though she'd left in a hurry, something inside him stirred, a mix of sorrow and warning. He found her old shawl hanging behind the door, faded and torn at one edge. He pressed it to his face. It still carried the faintest trace of lavender. Beneath it, he noticed boot tracks in the dust, not hers. They were heavier, deeper, and newer than 6 months old. Someone had been here. Taza stepped back into the yard, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the fading light, he saw fresh horse prints leading south toward the canyons. His pulse quickened. Evelyn's ring hadn't simply fallen. Someone had dropped it there, or thrown it. Either way, something told him she was in trouble. He mounted his horse, eyes fixed on the horizon where the canyon swallowed the sun. The wind carried a chill that whispered her name. He didn't know what awaited him there. Truth, betrayal, or death. But he knew one thing. The land never buried its secrets forever. Tonight, he would start digging them up. The trail to the southern canyon was narrow, carved by wind and time. Taza rode slow, letting his horse pick its way through the rocks as the night deepened around them. The stars came out one by one, cold and sharp against the dark. He had ridden these paths 100 times before, hunting trails, escape routes, sacred ground, but tonight they felt different, heavy. Watching Dot every so often, he stopped to study the ground. The hoof prints were still fresh, 2 horses, maybe 3. One lighter than the others, the kind Evelyn had always ridden. His hand tightened on the reins. The canyon mouth opened before him like a wound in the earth. The wind that came out of it was dry and cold, carrying the smell of smoke. He dismounted and crouched low, touching the ground. The ashes were recent. Someone had camped here not long ago. He moved forward silently, every step measured. His moccasins barely made a sound against the stones. Around a bend he saw the remains of a small fire, still warm, and beside it, a strip of torn fabric caught on a mesquite branch. He plucked it free and turned it over in his hand. It was part of a woman's skirt, pale blue, the same color as Evelyn's favorite dress. His jaw set hard. A voice echoed softly from the shadows ahead, low, gruff, and slurred. More than one. He slipped behind a cluster of rocks, his body still as the night itself. 2 men sat near the dying fire, both dressed in trail-worn dusters, revolvers slung low at their sides. Their horses were tied to a cedar stump a few yards away. Taza listened. Boss said she'd fetch good money down south. One of them muttered, tossing a pebble into the fire. Didn't think she'd fight like that. The other spat into the dirt. Ain't no ordinary woman, that one. Pretty thing, though. Shame to waste her on the traders. Taza's blood ran cold. His pulse thudded like war drums in his chest. Evelyn. They were talking about Evelyn. He moved his hand to the knife at his belt. But he didn't strike, not yet. 2 men met more nearby. If she was alive, he couldn't risk her safety. He waited, memorizing their faces in the firelight, one with a scar running from temple to chin, the other missing his left ear dot when they finally lay down to sleep. He slipped away like smoke on the wind. He followed the canyon deeper. Guided by instinct and faint signs, a broken twig, a faint trail of boot prints. Somewhere ahead, a faint flicker of light glowed against the rocks, another fire. He crept closer until he saw them. 3 riders sat around a wagon at the canyon floor. A woman was tied to its rear wheel, head bowed, wrists bound. Even in the dim firelight, Taza recognized the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair fell across her cheek. Evelyn. His chest tightened painfully. She was alive. One of the men stood guard, a rifle across his knees. Taza crouched behind a fallen log, his mind racing. He couldn't take them head-on. Not yet. He needed a plan. He waited until the guard turned away to relieve himself. Then, with the silence of a hunting cat, Taza crossed the sand and slipped behind the wagon. Evelyn stirred when he reached her. Her lips were cracked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Taza," she whispered, voice trembling. He pressed a finger to her lips. "Quiet," he breathed. "I'm here." Her eyes filled with tears, a single one tracing a path down her cheek. He worked at the rope with his knife, each fiber snapping softly. "Why did you come back?" she asked, barely audible. He paused for half a heartbeat. "Because the land gave me a ring," he said, her breath caught. "The ring." Before he could answer, a sharp voice rang out from the shadows. "Hey, what the hell's that?" The guard had turned back too soon. Taza spun, pulling Evelyn with him, diving behind the wagon as a bullet tore through the air. Horses screamed and the men shouted, scrambling for their guns. Taza shoved the freed rope into her hands. "Run when I tell you," he said. "But go!" He rose from cover, knife flashing in the firelight. and charged into the chaos like a storm born from the desert itself. The night exploded with gunfire, and the canyon began to echo with the ghosts of old battles once more. Gunfire tore through the still night like thunder rolling off the canyon walls. Sparks leapt from the campfire as bullets struck the stones around it. Taza ducked behind a boulder, his knife still slick with blood from the first man he'd felled. The second bandit shouted orders, stumbling backward, his revolver flashing in the dark. "Taza!" Evelyn's voice broke through the chaos, sharp with fear. She was half hidden behind the wagon, her hands trembling as she tried to free one of the horses still tied to the rail. He looked toward her, heart hammering. "Get down!" He barked. A gunshot answered him. The bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through flesh. Pain burned through him, but he didn't stop. He lunged from behind cover, rolling low through the sand, and slammed into the gunman before he could reload. The two men hit the ground hard, fighting for the weapon. Dust filled the air. Taza's strength won out. He drove his blade deep into the man's chest. The outlaw's breath hitched once, then fell still. Silence settled, heavy and broken only by the flicker of the fire. Taza stood over the fallen man, chest heaving, blood dripping down his arm. His eyes darted toward the canyon edge. One horse was missing. Someone had escaped. Evelyn. He called, running to her side. She was already cutting the last rope from the wagon wheel. When she looked up at him, her face was streaked with dust and tears. "There was another," she said, voice shaking. "He rode off as soon as the shooting started." Taza's jaw tightened. "He'll bring others." She nodded weakly. "I know." He scanned the camp, moving quickly. One of the dead men had a rifle. He slung it over his shoulder. Then he grabbed a canteen and tossed it to her. "Drink. We can't stay here." Evelyn took a small sip, her eyes never leaving him. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Taza turned toward her, his dark hair falling over his face. "I told you once. I don't turn away from what I start." Her lips trembled. "But they'll kill you." "They already tried. Then they'll have to try again." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. It wasn't pride or stubbornness, it was something deeper. A promise made long before words ever passed between them. They mounted the horses, riding hard through the canyon shadows. The moon hung high above, pale and watchful. Every sound echoed, every hoofbeat, every whisper of wind. Taza kept his eyes forward, following the faint path toward the northern ridge where the land opened into high plains. He needed space, sightlines, safety. When they reached a rocky plateau, he slowed the horses and dismounted. Evelyn slid to the ground, clutching her side. Her wrists were raw from the ropes, her dress torn and streaked with blood. "Sit," he said quietly. "Let me see." She obeyed, lowering herself onto a flat stone. He tore a strip from his own sash and wrapped it around her wrists with careful precision. His touch was gentle, but his hands trembled slightly. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for me," she murmured, watching him. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were distant, focused on the horizon where the stars burned like cold fire. "When I found your ring," he said finally, "I thought you were gone. The land keeps what it wants, but it gave that back. I took it as a sign." Evelyn looked down, her throat tightening. "I didn't lose it," she confessed softly. "They made me drop it when they came to take me." Taza's head snapped toward her. "Who?" "Men from town," she said bitterly. "They said I was harboring an Apache outlaw. They burned my home, took me to sell down south. I thought you'd never know." Anger flickered in his eyes like wildfire. "They'll pay for that," he said, voice low and dangerous. Evelyn reached out, touching his arm. "No, Taza, don't go back. I can't lose anyone else." He looked at her hand, small, trembling, covered in dust, then back at her face. "You won't lose me," he said, but even he wasn't sure if he believed it. Far below, faint echoes of hooves began to rise, distant but growing. The one who escaped was returning. Taza stood, every muscle coiled like a drawn bow. "They've found us." Evelyn rose beside him, fear flashing in her eyes. He handed her the rifle. "If they come close, aim for the chest. Don't hesitate. What about you?" she whispered. He looked toward the dark mouth of the canyon, where torches flickered like dying stars. "I'll make sure they never reach you." As the first light of dawn crept over the desert, Taza drew his knife and stepped into the rising dust, ready to face the ghosts that refused to die. The first rays of dawn painted the canyon walls in shades of copper and gold. Taza stood at the ridge, his chest bare and glistening with sweat and blood, his long black hair whipping in the dry wind. Below, the sound of horses echoed through the canyon, a growing thunder of pursuit. He turned to Evelyn, who clutched the rifle like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her eyes were wide, her breathing shallow. She'd seen men die before, but never for her. "They'll come from the south side," Taza said, his voice steady and low. "They'll try to push us toward the open plain. If they do, we're finished." She swallowed. "What do we do?" He scanned the terrain, broken rocks, scrub brush, a narrow trail winding up toward the mesa. "We go high. From there, we can see them before they see us." Evelyn nodded, trying to keep pace as Taza led the horses up the steep path. Her legs trembled, and more than once he reached back to steady her. Despite the danger pressing closer, there was a calm in his movements, the kind of calm that came only from years of fighting to survive. When they reached the top, the land opened wide, a sea of stone and silence stretching toward the horizon. Taza stopped near a cluster of rocks shaped like jagged teeth. He tethered the horses and crouched low, scanning the valley below. Dust rose in the distance, 5 riders, maybe 6. All armed. Evelyn crouched beside him, gripping the rifle so tightly her knuckles turned white. "There's too many." He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the riders. "Numbers don't matter if the land is on our side," he murmured. Then he pointed to a narrow outcrop where the path narrowed into a choke point. "There," he said. "We make our stand there." Evelyn looked at him in disbelief. "You can't fight 6 men alone." "I've fought worse odds," he said with a faint, humorless smile. "Besides, you're not just watching. You'll fight beside me." Her breath caught. "I've never." He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. "You will, today?" They moved quickly. Taza stacked stones for cover, laying out ammunition he'd taken from the dead bandits. Evelyn helped, her fear slowly hardening into something colder, resolve. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of men shouting orders below. Then the first shot cracked. A puff of dirt exploded near Evelyn's feet. She gasped and ducked behind the rocks. Taza didn't flinch. He lifted his rifle, took aim, and fired. One rider toppled from his horse, crashing to the ground. The others scattered, returning fire. Bullets sang through the air, ricocheting off stone. Evelyn's ears rang, her heart pounding like a drum. "Taza!" She shouted. "They're flanking left!" He shifted position, firing again, precise and calm. 2 shots, 2 men down. The rest hesitated, taking cover behind their mounts. Evelyn raised her rifle, trembling. She remembered what he'd said, aim for the chest. "Don't hesitate." She sighted one of the riders creeping up from below and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but the man fell. She stared at the rifle, stunned. "I hit him." Taza glanced at her, pride flickering briefly in his eyes. "Good. Now again." Another shot came from below, grazing his leg. He winced but stayed on his feet, reloading. The last two riders regrouped, shouting to each other, firing wildly. One bullet struck the rock beside Evelyn, shattering it. She screamed, ducking low. Then the air went still, too still. Taza froze, his instincts prickling. "Stay down," he whispered. A shadow moved on the far ridge. He turned just as a gunshot cracked through the morning air. The bullet slammed into his side, knocking him back against the rocks. Evelyn cried out, dropping her rifle, crawling to him. Blood spread across his ribs, dark and heavy. His breath came ragged. "Taza, no!" She sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound. He grabbed her wrist, his grip firm even through the pain. "Listen to me," he rasped. "There's one left. Don't let him near." She shook her head, tears streaming. "I can't. You can," he said, his voice fading but fierce. "The land doesn't favor the weak. It favors the ones who fight for what's true." Then he pushed the rifle back into her hands. Evelyn turned, fury replacing fear. The last gunman rode toward them, shouting, his rifle raised. She steadied her aim, hands trembling, and fired. The man fell from his horse, tumbling lifeless to the ground below. Silence returned. Evelyn dropped the gun and turned back to Taza, her hands shaking. He was pale, but still conscious. He met her gaze and managed a faint smile. "You did good," he whispered. She leaned close, pressing her forehead to his. "You're not dying here," she said fiercely. "Not after finding me." He closed his eyes briefly, the wind stirring his hair. "Then we ride at dusk," he murmured. "If the land lets us." As the sun rose higher, painting them in gold, Evelyn held him close, two souls bound by blood, dust, and the mercy of the wild. The sun crawled higher over the mesa, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The wind had gone still, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and blood. Taza sat propped against a boulder, his bare chest streaked with crimson and dust, his long black hair tangled from the fight. Evelyn knelt beside him, tearing the hem of her dress to bind his wound. He didn't flinch as she pressed the fabric against his side, though the pain made his vision blur. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the horizon where smoke from the battle still drifted faintly. "You need rest," Evelyn whispered, her hands trembling. "You've lost too much blood." Taza's lips curved into a faint smile. "Rest is for men who have finished their fight." "You've done enough," she said, voice breaking. "You saved me." He looked at her then, eyes dark and steady. "Not yet." Evelyn lowered her gaze, swallowing back tears. She had never met a man like him, one who carried pain as if it were an old friend. His presence was both frightening and comforting, like the storm that brings life and ruin at once. She finished bandaging him and sat back, wiping dirt from her face. "You said they came from the town," he said quietly. "Who led them?" Her face tightened. "A man named Caleb Horn. He's a cattle buyer from Silver Creek, the same one who used to visit my husband before he died. He told everyone I was keeping company with a savage. Said I'd shamed my husband's name." Taza's jaw clenched. "And the sheriff?" "Look the other way," she said bitterly. "No one in that town ever stood up for me." The silence that followed was heavy. Taza looked out over the canyon, a place carved by time and blood. "Men like him think the land belongs to them," he said. "But the land remembers who it truly favors." Evelyn watched him for a long moment. "You could leave," she said softly. "Ride far south, find peace." He shook his head. "Peace is not given. It's earned." She sighed, exhaustion in her voice. "Then what do we do now?" He studied the horizon again, where the sun was slowly swallowing the last of the shadows. "We go back," he said at last. "To Silver Creek." Evelyn's head snapped up. "What? No. They'll kill you." Taza met her gaze, unyielding. They already tried. The next time, I'll be the one waiting." She looked away, heart pounding. Part of her wanted to beg him to stop, to run and never look back, but another part, buried deep beneath years of fear, wanted to see justice. Before she could answer, Taz's hand found hers. "You said they took your home," he murmured. "But the land still remembers you. We'll take it back." Evelyn stared at him, tears welling. "You can't fight an entire town." A small smile touched his lips. "I don't need to fight them all. I only need to show them what they've become." As the day wore on, they built a small fire in the shade of the rocks. Taza rested while Evelyn scouted the ridge for any signs of returning riders. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. When she returned, the Apache warrior was sitting cross-legged, his tribal necklace glinting in the fading sun, eyes closed as if listening to something far away. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Speaking to the land," he said. "My people say the wind carries voices of the ones who came before. They guide those who still walk with purpose." Evelyn sank to her knees beside him. "And what do they tell you now?" He opened his eyes, calm and fierce all at once. "That the truth doesn't hide in the dirt. It waits for those who dare dig deep enough." That night, they rode north under a moon that looked carved from bone. The desert stretched endless before them, quiet, vast, and full of ghosts. Evelyn kept glancing at Taza, his silhouette strong against the starlight, the faint glimmer of turquoise beads catching the moon. He looked like something born of the earth itself, unbreakable. Eternal God as they approached the distant glow of Silver Creek, a knot of fear formed in her stomach. "Taza," she whispered, "what if they're waiting for us?" He didn't look at her. "Then they'll see what it means to be hunted by the land they betrayed." The wind rose behind them, scattering sand like whispers of warning. Evelyn tightened her grip on the reins. She didn't know what awaited them in that cursed town, but she knew one thing with certainty. There would be no turning back. The sun sank behind the ragged peaks, washing the desert in bruised shades of purple and rust. The wind carried the scent of burned sage and gunpowder, the smell of endings. Tahoma sat silently beside the cold ashes of the campfire, his hands stained with blood that was not his own. In his palm, the silver ring gleamed faintly in the dying light. He turned it slowly between his fingers, feeling its cold weight. "It came back to me," he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible over the whisper of the wind. 6 months ago, he had placed that same ring on Elara's hand, not as a promise of marriage, but as a vow of protection, a symbol of the fragile peace between them. And now it had returned, buried in the dirt of her farmland, as if the earth itself had wanted him to find it again. Elara knelt beside him. Her hair was tangled, her face pale and drawn, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. "I buried that ring," she said softly, "after you left. I thought it would keep the past where it belonged." Tahoma didn't look at her. "The past doesn't stay buried, not out here," he replied. "It finds a way to rise again. Same as bones. Same as truth." The silence stretched between them. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, a lonely echo across the canyon. Elara reached out, her fingers brushing the ring in his hand. "You shouldn't have come back, Tahoma," she whispered. "They'll come for us both now." He looked up at her, his dark eyes hard as flint. "Let them come," he said. "I've been hunted before." But inside, he felt the weight of it, not fear, but the burden of unfinished things. He had carried her memory through storms, across rivers and plains, through blood and betrayal. And now, seeing her again, he felt the same ache he'd tried to bury. The night deepened. They moved quietly through the canyon, their shadows long against the walls. Tahoma led her to a narrow cave hidden by mesquite and rock. He had found it years ago, a place the soldiers had never discovered. Inside, a small fire flickered to life, painting the walls with trembling light. Elara sat on a blanket while Tahoma cleaned his rifle. His muscles tensed with every sound outside, every rustle of wind out. She watched him for a long time before speaking. "That ring wasn't just a gift," she said. "It was a warning, wasn't it? You knew trouble would follow me." He paused, his hands stilling. "Your land sits where my people once prayed," he said quietly. "When I gave you that ring, I hoped it would remind others, Apache or white, that this ground wasn't for taking. But greed doesn't listen to prayers." Elara swallowed hard. "Those men, the ones after us, they said there's gold beneath my farm. Is it true?" Tahoma's jaw clenched. "Yes, but it's cursed gold, soaked in blood from both sides. My father's bones lie under that soil." He looked at her then, his voice low and rough. "That ring was meant to protect you from that curse. You were never supposed to dig it up." Elara's eyes widened. "Then the ring finding its way back to you means the land wants something finished," he said. The fire crackled. Outside, thunder rolled far off, a storm crawling toward them from the mountains. Tahoma reached into his pouch and took out a small leather talisman, worn smooth with age. He pressed it into her hand. "If I don't make it through the night, you ride east. Don't look back. When the storm breaks, they'll come. You'll hear them before you see them." Elara gripped his wrist, tears streaking down her dusty cheeks. "No, you're not dying for this land again. Not for me." He gave a faint, sad smile. "I don't die for land, Elara. I die for peace, the kind we were both foolish enough to dream about." Lightning flashed through the canyon mouth, lighting his face, fierce, determined, almost ghostly. The first raindrops began to fall, hissing against the embers, and in that moment, Tahoma slipped the ring onto a strip of rawhide around his neck. "If the land called it back," he murmured, "then it's not done with me yet." Outside, the hoofbeats began, distant at first, then closer, echoing like thunder. Elara's hand trembled as she reached for the rifle. Tahoma rose, muscles tensing, eyes sharp as the storm broke open above them. The past had come for them at last. The storm raged through the canyon like a living thing, howling and tearing at the earth. Rain came down in hard sheets, turning the dust to mud and making the rocks glisten under flashes of lightning. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, a steady, thunderous rhythm that echoed off the stone walls. Tahoma stood at the mouth of the cave, his long black hair plastered to his back, tribal jewelry clinking faintly in the rain. His muscles tensed with every roll of thunder. Behind him, Elara crouched near the fire, her rifle trembling in her hands. Eyes wide with fear and determination through the sheets of rain. Dark figures appeared, riders, at least 6 of them, their shapes outlined in the storm's silver light. They rode hard, rifles raised, their shouts drowned by the wind. Elara's voice broke through the noise. "Tahoma, there's too many." He didn't answer. He just stepped out into the storm, gripping his rifle in one hand and his knife in the other. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat, he looked like something carved from the earth itself, a spirit of the desert come to defend what was left of it. The first outlaw fired. The bullet struck the rock beside Tahoma, sending shards of stone flying. He dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired back. One rider fell. The others fanned out, circling like wolves inside the cave. Elara fired once, twice, each shot echoing like a scream. One of the riders tumbled from his horse, another turned and bolted into the storm. But 3 remained, closing in fast. Tahoma reloaded, his hand steady despite the rain. "Stay behind me," he shouted. She didn't listen. Elara ran out into the open, mud splattering her dress as she fired again. The sound of her rifle was swallowed by the thunder, but one bullet found its mark, A rider fell into the mud with a heavy thud. Then came the sharp crack of a gunshot, not hers. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her side. Blood bloomed beneath her fingers as she stumbled and fell. No. Tahoma's voice tore through the storm. He charged forward, fury in his eyes. He leapt at the nearest rider, dragging him from the saddle, knife flashing in the lightning's glow. They wrestled in the mud, the outlaw's face a mask of terror as Tahoma drove the blade home. The last rider turned his horse to flee, but Tahoma's rifle roared, and the man fell. Silence followed. Only the rain remained, falling soft now, washing the blood into the earth. Tahoma staggered back toward the cave, his chest heaving. Elara lay on her back near the fire, her breath shallow. The flames flickered against her pale face, against the mud and blood and the ring lying beside her, the same silver band that had begun it all. He knelt beside her, lifting her gently. "Stay with me," he whispered. She smiled faintly, her voice barely a breath. "You found it again." "The land gave it back," he said. "Maybe to remind us what was lost." Her fingers trembled as she touched his necklace, where the ring now hung on the rawhide cord. "It never wanted gold, Tahoma," she whispered. "It just wanted peace." Her hand fell away, still and soft. For a long moment, he didn't move. The storm had eased to a whisper. The fire burned low, crackling like the last breath of something ancient. Tahoma closed her eyes with his hand, then rose slowly to his feet. He took the ring from his neck, stared at it in the dim light, and then walked out into the rain. The canyon stretched before him, vast and silent. He walked to the edge where the earth dropped into darkness and dug with his bare hands, mud, rain, and sorrow mixing together. He buried the ring beneath a small pile of stones, pressing his palm to it as if sealing a prayer. When he stood, the dawn was breaking, the first light of morning spilling across the desert. The storm clouds drifted away, leaving the land washed clean. He turned once, looking back toward the cave. The smoke from the fire curled upward, pale against the golden sky. Then Tahoma mounted the last surviving horse and rode toward the horizon. His silhouette framed against the rising sun, a lone figure fading into the endless desert. Behind him, the wind whispered through the stones, carrying the echo of Elara's voice, soft as memory. It never wanted gold. It just wanted peace. And the land, at last, was quiet.